evening or late afternoon to everyone. This is Minister Michael Muhammad. Once again, coming to you on behalf of the Street Peace Coalition. We are a grassroots violence intervention prevention organization, and we come to you at 5 o'clock each week of this season of our show here on Chicago Comcast CAN TV, Channel 21. For those of you in Chicago, of course, you're viewing us on Channel 21 on Comcast. We also have viewers who are live streaming with us via our Facebook page from anywhere in the world that has an internet connection, as well as on Instagram. And so we want to welcome everybody that's listening or viewing, and thank you if you're a repeat viewer. We appreciate your time and taking the time to hear us express our views, our philosophies, our strategies, our outlook on the issue of violence, specifically in the black community each week. And so this season we have started off and we are near completion in laying the base for understanding the origins and nature of violence in the black community. And so we've been talking about this thing that I call the seven-headed monster that is responsible for producing violence in the black community specifically. And so last week I went through a short litany connecting the dots, starting with Chicago Public Schools, its budget, and how that budget, much of that budget is centered around the dismantling of quality education, the demonization, the vilification of young black and brown boys in Chicago public schools, and the militarization of the budget of Chicago public schools. We looked at the Chicago Police Department, its budget, its bloated, disproportionate budget that's full of graft, mismanagement, and a lack of accountability, and gross payments for settlements due to police misconduct, coming into a culture of white superiority, a white Irish male superiority kind of culture that demonizes black people and brown people. And so we have a lot of people in the police department that disabuse their authority, their power, all the way up into murdering people on the street. Then we looked at DCFS, the Department of Children and Family Services, as it's most commonly known, and its role in the management and care of young black people. And then we looked at IDOC, the Illinois Department of Corrections. Thank you. Trying to rush. And its role in its management of us, of our community, and specifically black men in our community, and how it further destroys the black community and creates a psychology of violence and a pathology of violence. And so we started looking at on the federal level. We talked about Cook County Jail in relationship to IDOC, and I started talking about the DEA because I want to conclude on the federal level. And so very quickly, the DEA, I pointed out that it makes over 1.5 million drug arrests annually, and 85% of those that it incarcerates, well, just about 85%, is for simple possession of a small amount of narcotics. Most of those it arrests for illegal gun possession or trafficking are black and brown people. And so the DEA further thrives off of the ideal that blacks are innately criminal And so this is the pathology in America that we're talking about. All this directed and has the effect of the destruction of the black family. And once that family structure is destroyed, the traditional black family is destroyed, then our children, we're vulnerable as children to these institutions that further destroy and deteriorate our ability to be civilized human beings. And lastly, the White House. The White House, going all the way back to Woodrow Wilson in 1914, who began to confront the issue of narcotics in a legal way in the United States, fast forwarding all the way up to Ronald Reagan, who began the Comprehensive Drug Abuse and Prevention Control Act in 1970, and the Office of National Drug Control Policy in 1988, all the way through that period, the Iran-Contra fiasco, where the government, the White House, was selling drugs to finance its fight against in Nicaragua and intervene in the affairs of a sovereign nation using drug money, and the black community was used as the market to raise drug money. And so all the way through to George Bush Sr., who intensified, he had a zero tolerance policy for drug use. Now we're talking about the pipeline to prison, the building of the prison industrial complex, all the way through to President Clinton, Bill Clinton, who, of course, is famous for the 3 strikes you're out, famous for intensifying more mass incarceration of black and poor black and brown people while letting wealthy cocaine traffickers, wholesale bulk cocaine traffickers get slaps on the wrist. And so to accentuate what we're talking about, I'm very fortunate to have a guest with us this show, a comrade of mine, a friend of mine, a brother of mine that I have had the fortune of working with since around 1997 or 98, somewhere in there. We began to bump heads and began to work with one another in the process of trying to organize a national, what some call a gang summit. We called it the Urban Peace Summit. And so we were organizing with parties from around the country to confront the issue of street violence. And so he is a local, he's homegrown, Chicago-made activist who's worked in the social service sector. He is a former official ranking member of one of the street organizations in Chicago. He's also an ordained priest, reverend, if you will, Reverend Gerardo Serna. I want to welcome you to the show this evening.
Thank you, Brother Muhammad. It's a great opportunity to sit here with you and to address our brothers and sisters out in the Chicagoland area. It's, as you all know, that the violence out in our communities are nothing to smile at, and definitely there's a value to our lives that it needs to be longer than a 30-second blip on the TV news at night. And we're not getting that. We're not getting the respect. We're not getting the need of attention in our black community of what's going on a daily basis. And mostly because my personal opinion would be that the media in Chicago is controlled and it's suppressed by people that benefit from violence. And there's definitely people that are benefiting from the violence in the black community, and we need to pick at what that is. And as we've done since the 1990s, Minister Michael Muhammad and myself have been able to prove that a united front between the black community and the Latino or the brown community, we can be very effective. And I'd like to share one instance of it. In 1997, we were able to organize about 7 or 8 of the largest street organizations in the city of Chicago at that time around the Puerto Rican festivities. And as some of you may know, the Puerto Rican festivities are held in early June in Humboldt Park on the west side of Chicago. And usually it's violent. There's always violence because Humboldt Park divides two very strong organizations, and we kind of have to meet in the middle and celebrate what it is to be Puerto Rican for those that are Puerto Rican. And we came together. We brought these organizations together, the heads of those organizations at the time, and we agreed that it would be a peaceful celebration of the Puerto Rican community, and we were successful. We got together just 2 months prior. We had good conversations. We had the right people at the table, and we were respectful of each other, regardless of the fact that everybody around the table were rivals. And the entire week went by with only 4 arrests in the Humboldt Park festivities. 3 of them were for disorderly conduct, and 1 was for drinking in public. And it was one of the most peaceful celebrations of the Puerto Rican festivities on record. And that's just one of many examples that we have that has shown us that the black and the brown community, when we do come together with the same interests of peace and love, we're able to accomplish a lot.
Well, thank you for bringing that up. I have 2 questions for you. One, it's my understanding that we were able to bring together organizations that sat at the table for the first time in their history and agreed to at least to a ceasefire. The second question is on the issue of black and brown coalition, because there's a lot of animosity between our 2 communities. There's a lot of hostility, a lot of hostile attitudes between our 2 communities. And so how do you view that, and how would you respond? What do you think? How do we meet that challenge of our 2 communities having been pitted against each other, and in some ways having just, it seems like almost a natural kind of animosity? I don't know when it began, but how would you respond to that?
I'm not sure, and I'll start with the second question first. I'm not sure when it began. I think when Harold Washington was elected and was campaigning to be mayor back in the 80s, he had people like Rudy Lozano Sr., he had Chuy Garcia, he had several other people that he brought as part of his team to run for aldermen and other positions. Some were successful. Rudy Lozano, unfortunately, was murdered, and a lot of things kind of fell apart at that time. I think ultimately, if we talk about today, why does the black and brown community not talk to each other? I think a lot of it has to do with very possibly that the Latino community are in a comfortable position. We don't have the day-to-day violence to the extent that the black community does. Our infrastructure, our business infrastructures, are usually a little bit better within our communities for whatever and I don't know why. It doesn't mean that we get along better with the police department or the city government, but obviously there's been forces at work to make sure that we don't get along. In terms of more of a street nature, I've been in and out, as you know, and there's some people in the Latino community that don't like black folk, and there's black folk that don't like Mexicans or Puerto Ricans or whatever, and some of it I know is rooted from the prison system, stuff that they learned in the prison system, and they just bring it out to the streets, and they have just certain feelings around it. And it's hypocritical of our Latino community to not appreciate their African brothers and sisters, considering that I myself, my grandfather was a lot darker than I was, and it's kind of hard to say that he was just Mexican. I know very well that he has deep African roots in southern Mexico, So I know that I'm black as well as I am being brown. So a lot of people don't want to deal with it or address it that way. In terms of probably getting a little bit deeper, I did a march with several people around peace and drugs with a poet out of Mexico City that lost his son in Mexico from the drug wars, and as we walked through Pilsen and Little Village and made our way through Lawndale, somebody had yelled from our group, let's stop the drugs or something like that. And somebody, an African American man, older gentleman, said, well, stop bringing it. And he pointed towards me. And I have to agree that if we look at what's going on, who is bringing in the drugs into our community? It's not just, and I don't want to say it's just the Latino community, but there are forces, there's cartels, there's these bigger people that we don't want to acknowledge or speak of in public.
Well, not to cut you
Yeah.
off, but that's why I'm laying out this matrix
Right.
and how the government and social institutions are involved in that,
Right.
because as we know, it's come out in later revelations that a man as powerful as Pablo Escobar
Right.
was intimately involved with a government agency having a level of carte blanche to flood poor communities with narcotics. And so I think it's important that we really understand that the enemy of our communities has been very skilled through the idea of white male supremacy to have us at odds with each other. It's an extension of what we talk about in the black community as the Willie Lynch syndrome, where we pit each other against each other based on differences, based on our lack of a thorough knowledge of our history and how ancient we are as a people, not knowing that, as the Honorable Elijah Muhammad said, black is universal. So when you travel the earth, yes, the first Mexicans were black people. They were Mexicans, but they were black people. The first Puerto Ricans were black people. They were from that island, but they were black people. The first Chinese people were black people. They were Chinese, but they were black people. So, but the enemy accentuates our differences. So, do you find yourself? I know you find yourself in the minority in your willingness to try to build coalition with people like myself and other people from my community. How do you handle the kind of negativity that I'm sure you receive from your own people from being willing to embrace and work with somebody like me?
Well, it's difficult because there's a lot of people that work in the community. There's activists, there's community organizers that will bend their knee to pressures of the system to kind of make it a little bit broad without throwing too many politicians under the bus at one time. But they're promised city jobs or they're promised subcontracts. People think that the outfit is non-existent in Chicagoland. I've argued with people that say, the mafia, the Italian mafia doesn't exist. And, well, it's great to live in that bubble, but they do exist. What control do they have? What control does the Irish mob have? And so we're in a position let's say I'm in a position in where I have to, do I live a comfortable life and take a city contract or a city job with a subcontractor and make $68,000 a year being a sewer rat? Or a rat for somebody else? Or do I be true to who I am? Do I be true to my community? Am I true to my brothers? And I choose to be that, and that's a very difficult thing because that's going against the grain. And if there's anything that they teach us out in the hood, right, is don't ever go against the grain. And that's a difficult thing to do. And so there are others like me that want to do different and build that gap, But again, it's difficult.
Okay. Yeah, so we're gonna be short on time. It's a
Yeah.
fast show, but I want to. I know you've made a transition from being heavily involved in the street to becoming an ordained clergy. What what role do you think religion plays in the tension between our communities that helps to fuel the drugs and the violence?
Um, I think part of it is the very old school Catholic sort of, and those that are Mexican would understand that it's put your head down. You know, you put your head down. You don't challenge anything. You know, keep quiet, look the other way. So there's a lot of that still exists in where our communities are taught that, you know, let's just put our head down, let's look the other way. And so that's what we've successfully done with our black community. You know, we can just look across Cermak, we can look across Holman, we can look across Austin Boulevard, and you know, just look the other way. Put your head down, look the other way. You know, and so religion has really played a part in that. The other side of it is you know, everybody talks, you know, and I know you've had this experience when we ask for help. You know, religious folk always say, well, I'm going to pray for you. Well, that's great. You know, and everybody's willing to pray. But what I've been telling people is, well, what did Jesus do before he got handed his sentence? Mm-hmm. He prayed, and then he stood up. And he said, bring it. You know, essentially, people kind of hate that I talk about Jesus that way, but it is what it is.
Okay. Well, we're almost out of time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to flash to our overhead. Those of you who would like to contact the Street Peace Coalition, you'll see our information there on the screen. I brought this guest on today. We have a long-standing relationship. In fact, he's one of the top sponsors that have helped the Street Peace Coalition in different ways over the years. And so with the last few minutes that I have left, I'm going to ask him to speak in his native language to his community about the issues of street violence as it relates to our relationship with one another as black and brown communities, and how the government and institutions in the government are being used, including mass media, to keep us pitted against one another politically, socially, religiously, and otherwise, that allows us not to leverage our strength as communities to overcome white supremacy, which is at the basis of what's happening to both of our communities. So I'm going to let you take us off the air. You got about 60 seconds left. Okay. I want to thank you.
Thank you, brother. Hermanos y hermanas, les quiero decir que es muy necesario que ustedes salgan de sus casas, salgan desde sus iglesias, vean sus hermanos y hermanas que son afroamericanos, que están en una posición de mucha necesidad. Necesitan nuestra ayuda, no solamente nuestra ayuda y oración, pero necesitan nuestra acción. Tenemos que actuar como buena gente, como buenos cristianos, como buenos musulmanos, como buena gente de fe en estar con nuestra comunidad afroamericana. Sin nosotros, ellos no van a poder salir adelante, y sin ellos nosotros no vamos a poder salir adelante tampoco. Y tenemos que hacer ese empuje adelante juntos.
Thank you, and we hope you enjoyed today's show. Until next week, and we'll have a part 2 with our guests later on and before the season is over, to get deeper into this discussion. This is Minister Michael Muhammad signing off for the Street Peace Coalition. Thank you.